Good afternoon again, everyone. For those of you who joined us over the past few weeks, welcome back. If you're new to all this, then welcome. I'm Mark Healy. I'm the Executive Director of the Ivey Academy. That's the Learning and Development wing of Ivey Business School in London. We're the only full-service university-based learning and development house in Canada. Our purpose is pretty simple: to help transform the Canadian economy and advance Canadian competitiveness. We've been impacted like others. We're pivoting as fast as we can, and we're really excited. We're going to be launching some new virtual programs that are purpose-built for the COVID era. So more on that soon. Speaking of COVID, this is week 11 for us here at Ivey. Time's a funny thing. It feels like we've been in this and going through this together for a long time. I want to take a minute to thank everyone for the support that we've gotten in these strange times, from everyone from faculty and staff at Ivey to other areas, and clients and alums like the ones we have with us today. I think this is Tony and Kevin's third rodeo with us, actually. And I want to thank all of you out there for taking time out of your day today to support us, and the nice notes that we've gotten for doing these live streams. I'm glad we found some value here. I've talked about this a little bit already, but I really see it sharply now. It's been interesting to me watching what's happening around Ivey with our clients in the community, reactions and behaviors over the last 10 weeks or so. For the first half, I really thought I saw speed and action and ingenuity and altruism and a sort of we, not me attitude. Old battle lines went away, bureaucracy and red tape and rules pushed aside for collaboration and a focus on results. But that was the first 4 or 5 weeks. In the last few weeks, I actually think I've seen a backslide into old habits, old paradigms, the return of bureaucracy, the return of rules and red tape, and a whole lot more me, not we, which, kind of frankly sucks. I liked it a whole lot better a few weeks ago when we were innovating at light speed and putting political stuff aside. I used to work in consulting in Toronto with a guy named Mark Satov, and he said a few weeks ago a very similar thing to what Sukhinder said on our prep call. In a weird way, it was easier for the first 4 or 5 weeks of COVID. There were rules and they basically applied to everyone. And since then, and now, it's much harder. It's messy, and it's more about interpretation and independent decision making on the part of governments and firms and employees and citizens, trying to balance doing their part and safety. And so I think that's part of the backslide, and some of where we're going to go today. If you joined us for our last session on strategy in an uncertain future, starring Tony and Kevin, you probably left feeling either a bit more hopeful or maybe even more discouraged, depending on which part of the economy and Tony's borked by not borked matrix you fell in. And here now we are another month and a half on, and we want to check back in on how we're doing and where we're going, and dig into some areas of the economy that have been most affected. So Tony's back with us to help guide the conversation today. Tony's a professor at Ivey, a faculty director with us at the Academy. His work kind of sits at the corner of strategy and economics. And Kevin O'Brien is also back with us. Kevin is the president at WW Canada. And I think we're single-handedly increasing his speaker bureau and media appearance fees by featuring again. So Kevin, you're welcome. We're very fortunate to be joined by two more very smart guests we think bringing a lot to the conversation. Sukhinder Singh Cassidy is now the very recently former president of StubHub, is an Ivey HBA from '92. She's with us. She's worked for some small startups. You may have heard of them, Google and Amazon. She's a huge champion of women in tech, has won too many awards to rattle off here. She lives in the Bay Area. And Frances McRae from ISED in Ottawa is also with us. She has a very long title, and consequently, I imagine, an extra large business card. She's the Assistant Deputy Minister of Small Business Marketplace Services at ISED, that's the old Industry Canada, with part of the federal government, and it's part of the Department of Industry at Industry, Science and Technology, that committee. As always, I'm going to moderate and host traffic a bit. We've also got Sean Ackland Grant with us. He's our executive producer. He'll be our tech lead we'll figure out sort of when and how to come in with questions that come in from the audience. So apologies in advance. We never get to all of them, but we'll sort of do our best. Sean, over to you to talk a bit about what else is going to go on today.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. And thank you everyone for tuning in. If you've joined us in the past, we encourage audience questions. And as Mark said, try to get to as many as we can. If you haven't joined us before, you can submit your own questions by double clicking the Q&A icon in the bottom of the window. You can also upvote questions you like by clicking the thumbs up icon next to them. We're live streaming this session to our YouTube channel, and the full recording will be available there and on our blog at iveyacademy.com later today. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Tony. I wanted to start with you. I think we last had you on April 9th. It's hard to believe it was that long ago in a way. And you gave us a bit of a view at that point. Just wanted to kind of come back to you and ask you, in the face of reopening and some of the things that we've seen over the last 2 months, kind of where are we? Could we start with you?
Yeah, terrific. Thanks, Mark, and greetings everybody, and a shout out to current and past students. Nice to have you here. Good. Yeah. So I thought I would do just a little macro update, Mark, for a few minutes. I'll try to be quick. I've got a few charts that always, I think, helps a little bit to show some data for folks, just to kind of set the stage for our panelists. We've got a great group, so I'd like to get to them as quickly as possible. But if that's okay, I'm going to share out my screen here and just walk you through a little bit of what we're seeing now in the kind of current macroeconomic context, and to leave you with sort of three themes that I think are sort of big evolutions or even shift changes in the current state on the macro side. So that'll set us up for our conversation. So I'm just going to put this up here, and a little macro snapshot. Looks like you can see that. So yeah, let me start just kind of where are we at, and Mark, you will remember, I know that we talked a lot about in the first session we talked a lot about what kind of shape of recovery, and now it's become kind of part of the standard lexicon, L, U, V, and then the dreaded W. And what I'm showing you here is a global forecast, so for aggregation of virtually all countries on what we're seeing. A couple of things to highlight here. One is, I think that the consensus view is that V-shaped recovery seems unlikely. The sort of standard or consensus view seems to be more U-shaped, or as it's being called now, check mark shaped, and you can see that down in the slide I've got here, that they're showing a gradual recovery, not a kind of snapback. The second point that you can take away from this slide is that the recovery, the estimates and forecasts have been deteriorating. And so this is a little maybe hard to follow, but the basic thrust of it is, the more recent the forecast, the worse it looks as the data are rolling in, and the extent of the sort of carnage of the whole thing in the economy is apparent. A little closer to home, I thought this was helpful the other day. TD Econ, certainly a go-to site for me for getting kind of updates on what's going on in the economy, said, actually the way to think about this is a little more subnational or macro into different sectors. And really, there's going to be some sectors over on the right-hand side that are going to have a snapback, and they've got a list. If you go to their to this report, they've got a list of which sectors they kind of think might do that. About 30% of GDP, they're saying, can snap back pretty quickly. But look at in the middle here, sort of 60%, over half the economy, is going to be more of a longer U-shaped recovery. And then of course others, and you can think of the suspects, who those might be. Certainly anything in entertainment or where people are clustered together, frontline service businesses and so on, are going to be slower to recover. When we aggregate that all up, maybe we get the U, but again, very much a story of variegation down there in their analysis. One of the difficulties in talking about the economy is that the data comes in so slowly that it's already out of date the moment we get releases. So we had a release today and of a bunch of new information, and it was already, it was from like April and so on. So I've been turning to nowcasts. And I want to highlight a couple of points here, which is that the nowcast, so I'm shifting to the US here, the nowcasts continue to deteriorate. So if you look down here, second quarter, this is, most people think is going to be the bottom, we hope, of the downturn. down 51% as of yesterday's nowcast forecast over previous quarter. So, it's just a dramatic drop, right? And what's going on? Well, the big story, and I'm going to come back to this, is really a little hard to see there, but on the right-hand side, I'm showing you this big blue swath of downturning is really consumer demand. So it's always the biggest part of the economy, but it doesn't necessarily in traditional downturns show up as the biggest component of aggregate demand that falls. Here it is. And so that's going to be something I want to talk about a little bit. And of course, that's tied in with this story, our latest release this morning, US initial job claims. And I'm kind of jokingly saying here, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Because we had nearly 1.9 million new initial job claims that just came out. But that's better than it's been. As you can see, the numbers are getting better while getting worse. So
Tony, just quickly, can you reshare your screen? It seems like we're getting some feedback in the chat. The slides aren't keeping up.
Okay. Yep, will do. And, oops, sorry, that's not the one I wanted. That's the one I want. Sean, give me a quick sense. Yes.
That's one, Tony.
That's perfect. Yep. I just wanted to make sure everyone could see what you were.
Good. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. So let me finish off with this. So again, the idea here is dramatic numbers, and no matter where you look, but maybe bottoming out is the story. I want to hit three themes and just stop there and let our panelists pick up on these and other topics that they've got that I think you'll find really interesting. What I see is three big changes since the last time we were kind of on here, and those are these. One, and Mark kind of hinted at this. We're 2 months ago or a month ago even, we were all doing the same thing, right? Essential industries, lockdown, everybody, you look around the world, except for, of course, Sweden, which everybody's got their eye on, is like, wow, so different. And is that working and all that kind of stuff. But you know what? We're all Swedens now. And that's because everybody's a little bit different timing on their containment strategy and the virus, but also just different politics and different strategies that are playing out. And so there's tremendous amount of heterogeneity now in the containment strategies and therefore on the economy. And this is true not only across countries, but also within. So think about BC now opening up, Ontario still not yet. So this is going to be really challenging for, I think, businesses to deal with, who are multi-jurisdictional, to deal with that heterogeneity. I think, though, a big theme that I do want to kind of highlight here is the second point, which is, we're moving now from an environment where it was mandated that you couldn't go out and spend to one where you're allowed to but may not. If we open, will they come? And so what we're seeing is a dramatic uptick in savings rates. And some of that, of course, was forced because you weren't allowed to shop. But now that you are, it's not totally clear that consumers are going to jump in and make up, kind of lost ground, hence the no-V recovery. US personal savings rate jumped to 33%. Look at that number on the left-hand side, dramatic change. Canada, a little bit less, but still the story. And I know Kevin's got some really interesting data on this as well, but I'll just highlight one that gets to this point, which is that, think about air travel, talk about a troubled sector, obviously. Only 14% of consumers say they're going to resume travel when restrictions are lifted. And, so the point here is that even though governments may allow it, it may not happen because consumers are concerned about their jobs, they're concerned about getting infected, and they're just fundamentally wanting to save more money for the potential, possible recurrence and so on. Final point I want to make is that we have kind of flipped back and forth thinking about this crisis as being, demand shock, supply shock, and I think most businesses experience it as a demand shock in the sense that you could have supplied them but weren't allowed to if you were closed. But I feel like what I'm seeing now as we've come out of lockdown is that we're seeing the supply side kick back in as a bind. And not only, and much talked about, I won't talk about it too much, the idea of disrupted supply chains we're seeing, but I want to leave you with this thought, and I think others can kind of riff on this here a little bit, is that if we open up and consumers don't come back, will business models be viable? And so I'm highlighting two here, that maybe the two most obvious, and certainly Sukhinder, this is where your world lives on the right-hand side here. Will live music survive? When you have to socially distance and you're not allowed to group people together. Can restaurants be profitable at 25% capacity? And industry after industry is going to face this. And I hate to say it, but it feels to me like we're going to end up, all the things that are fun are what's being taken away. So I sort of jokingly say, welcome to the no fun economy, where those things that we did for entertainment and joy and all those kind of things are going to be clamped down and maybe not viable as businesses when they're having to do so much physical distancing. So those are the big three changes I think are there. I know our panelists are going to have some these and other points that they can feed off of. And let me stop there, and I'll stop sharing my screen. And Mark, over back to you.
So sometimes we refer to Tony as Eeyore around here, and well, welcome. If I'll tell you something, if we open, I will come, and I will pay for the table next door, or the table right next to me, to be open so that I can have a meal in a restaurant. There you go. You paint a bit of a picture there. I think we wanted to go to Sukhinder next. I think in the prep you talked about 50,000 live events coming to a halt at the same time, and so maybe could you just kind of give us a reaction to what you saw from Tony and what your perspective on where we sit now?
Sure, a couple things. Well, first of all, as we chatted about earlier, I think that the salient short-term point is we're in a mixed metaphor environment, and I think that that's sort of my first point. Whether you are a company that has live events like we do, or we did at StubHub, I just left, as you know, or whether you are thinking about bringing your employees back to work. I mean, we have employees, and I'm sure many of you do, employees that are in different states. Like, how do you even create a consistent policy for coming to work? Even something like that is now a mixed metaphor. So I think we're going to be living in a mixed economy for quite a while, right? And to your point, consumer demand is just one part of it. Some portion of people will go and some will not, right? And so I think when it comes to so first of all, I think we're in a mixed environment on all fronts for quite a while. Demand, employee, talent, savings, spending, travel. I mean, you name it, it's going to be mixed. And I think that will create maybe more challenges in some ways than when everybody was doing the exact same thing. In terms of things like live and entertainment and leisure and restaurants, do I think they will come back? Yes, I do, because we are by nature social creatures. What you're seeing right now is a lot of ingenuity in how people do these things, as you can appreciate. Some restaurants are going to be able to lift their prices, and even if they take out tables, make it, and others, will not in the short term. Over the medium term, I think that we will see a vaccine, and I think we will see a recovery. I think those people who can and have business models where for less density, people will pay a premium, may have some advantage, obviously, in the short term, where they can create a business model that requires less density. I would say there's even ways to do that in music and entertainment and sports, right? Though, of course, we know that a big part of any experience, whether it's dining or what have you, is the people around you. So I guess I'm more bullish over the medium term. I think the short term is hard because it's a mixed metaphor, even as things open. And I think that I don't think that density is done, i.e., the idea of people being able to be together in places. I think it will just be measured and mixed for a far longer period than we thought. I think everybody who expected, Q4 to be a period where everybody can just act as normal, that's clearly not true. But I am more bullish over the longer term that we'll find ways to be together again.
Kevin, I was hoping we could come to you next. You talked the last time we were together about pivot and opportunity, and just what's kind of happened with you and your business since we last talked.
Certainly a lot has changed. It feels like more than a couple of months ago, to your point, Mark. I mean, It's unbelievable how things have continued to evolve. And the short version of kind of where we were, just to kind of quickly recap on that, about 2/3 of our customers use an app only, and the other 1/3 use an app and historically have gone to a physical workshop. And the revenue split, we obviously charge more for folks that go to a workshop. So when they can't go to a physical workshop, that's kind of a big deal. So if I go back in time, the short version of it, on the Wednesday, we're largely business as usual. We're doing some contingency planning about what we do with that 1/3. On the Thursday, I made the call to close our Canadian head office. On the Friday, we made the decision to pause our physical workshops, effective the coming Monday. And by the next Thursday, we had shifted all of those physical workshops to virtual workshops delivered through Zoom. And to do that, that meant trying to recreate all the magic, the key moments of truth of that physical experience. It meant scheduling virtual workshops. It meant training 14,000 part-time employees worldwide. It meant communicating the new reality, the schedule, et cetera, to the members so they could find where they were supposed to be. And doing all of that, of course, with our offices closed, including our product development teams and everybody all working from home. So it was quite an exercise, and really drove a spirit of innovation. But at the time, I talked about how it was also creating opportunity. I think there's clear opportunity for the business I'm in. I mean, WW is about helping people maintain their health, achieve a healthy weight, find balance in their lives. It's got meditation components and activity components, as well as kind of the core food component. And that's really resonating right now. So our digital growth is really very good. Our workshop growth, as you might imagine, is a little bit more challenged, even though we've moved it to virtual. But what we found is that the innovation is ongoing, and I think will continue to go. We have to operate, I think, with the anticipation that, to Sukhinder's point, eventually we will come out of this and we will be able to reconvene. However, the timing of that is not at all clear. So there's some things that we've been doing in the interim that I think will find its way into the future. We've introduced some new kinds of programming, taking advantage of kind of one-to-many that you can do in a virtual environment. So that's, weekly guest presentations in Canada to thousands of Canadian members. Or Oprah's been doing this really cool thing where this coming Saturday will be the 4th of 4, where she just opened it up to the world. And literally we've had hundreds of thousands of people from around the world engaging with Oprah and her guests, Dwayne Johnson, leading meditation experts, her best friend Gail, on a weekly basis, just to kind of talking about and engaging with her through Zoom on dealing with kind of the COVID reality. Really poignant this last Saturday, because it was right on the heels of all the unrest that's going on in the US as well, and Oprah and Gail were able to speak directly to that. But it's created an immediacy of one-to-many connections that I think will survive as we come out of this period. We've added additional content to our app, things that we think are particularly relevant right now. Partnership with FitOn was introduced so that we've got additional activity content. We've added water tracking, sleep tracking, things that, like sleep tracking was really important for us to add right now, given some of the challenges that people are facing. In Canada, we launched an e-commerce capability because our product sales in our studios obviously went to zero. So that stood up. And importantly, I think we've engaged differently with the community. One of the things, for example, we did was there's a great organization in Canada called Community Food Centers. And they deal with food deserts, which are a real issue in big parts of Canada. And we did some co-investment with them where when our members did some things, we threw some money behind it. And there's versions of that going on globally that I think have done in some small way tried to help out in the current situation. But behind the scenes, it's also required us to revisit our strategy and structure. And what that's meant is accelerating a transition to a hybrid world of virtual and physical, and doubling down on some of the digital growth that we would have done anyway, but it probably would have taken 18 to 24 months. So, it's been a busy period, but that's the quick update on kind of where we're at. And then as we go through the conversation, I can touch on some other things.
Yeah, remarkable inside of a couple of months. Francis, will come to you next. I think this was one of the points that we were sort of making with you is in some ways remarkable speed and reaction on the part of government. That's a compliment. not only to roll out programs, but to adapt them sort of on the fly. We had this, we had this guy, John Shell, on with us a couple of months ago, who at the time was sort of pushing on the small business front and pushing for rent relief. And, that turned out to be a thing that got addressed along with a number of other pieces. And so just from your perspective, from a government perspective, where are we in all of this right now?
Thanks, Mark. So happy to be here. First of all, I have been listening really well and taking some notes on what people have said. So my comments are going to pick up on some of the points people have made here. You started, Mark, by talking about, quick reactions. I think really what the government's objective was to move quickly and adjust. And, one of the things that you always have to think about when you're in, governing is, being sure that you're not creating kind of social unrest, actually, by people actually, suddenly thrown out of work and onto the streets and in some very precarious situations. So, done all the meeting about the grammars first out the door. And now you're starting to see, to your point about reactions, you're starting to see now, people talking about, well, if people aren't entitled to those things, we have to deal with that. Same thing with the wage subsidy. People need to be telling the truth. They're testing all of that to the public, to newly appointed auditor general, your budget officers. So there's kind of like the first need was to support people, to support businesses.
Hey, Francis, we're just having a little bit of trouble with your feed. So I think we'll try and come back to you on this point. It might help if you turned your video off and just left your audio on. But as we'll come back to Francis on this point, I think we want to try to get to some quick lessons learned before we kind of look forward in time. And Sukhinder, I wonder if we could start with you on just, what are one or two kind of quick lessons learned that you've personally taken away and that you think will be long lasting here?
Sure. Well, look, I think in terms of leadership lessons, I would come back to Kevin's point. At StubHub, we pivoted remarkably quickly. And in that, I think the team found an esprit de corps and a relationship back to our core mission at its sort of essence, if you will, because we had to react so quickly on every front. From furloughing to policies to, vendor management. There was not a part of the company that was not affected. And so, but what it led to, and people talked about it and still talk about it, is, and I'll come to this point in a moment, they just felt connected like they haven't done. And this was all in a work from home environment as well, because we actually closed, I think, a week before everything sort of went crazy in the US in terms of suspension of leagues and games and tours and all those sorts of things, and shelter in place orders. So I would say, number one, it's amazing how quickly people come back to the essence of something in a crisis. And I will say that, and our teams got connected and all the noise shut down, all the things you debate as a big company. There's just clarity of purpose and clarity of vision. And I would say, and that's continued. So I think that continues to exist at StubHub, which is great, despite the fact that we've had to make many hard decisions, including restructuring a company. I will say the other lesson, though, that comes to this point about culture, yes, you have to be fast. It's funny, cultures are very understated in normal times, and they come to the fore in times like this. And so, as I'm sure Kevin has experienced at Weight Watchers, there's no doubt that people's connection and even sort of the way people have held themselves and others, the standard and the care that I've seen inside the company are pretty unprecedented. And so, I'm really proud of our culture, but it's not something I would have said in normal times. I would have said, yeah, our culture is great, but I think that what was understated in normal times really comes to be really appreciated, I would say, in times like this. So from a leadership perspective, yes, move very, very fast. And you don't even have to say anything. Culture just rises to the fore and people are connected to the mission in the ways that you have to sort of demonstrate when the company is, let's say, big. You actually don't need to do it all. It just shows up. And so it really shows you what your true culture is in a way that I've appreciated. In terms of looking forward, look, I think that, I think as you can see, and probably this is a bigger metaphor, what's going on in the US right now, George Floyd, all of these other items, I think there's just a lot of unease and anxiety. So on the one hand, I think people have learned that they're far more resilient and adaptable than they think they are in their professional environments. So everybody who's had to pivot, change, like all these things you try and teach people, adapt, ability to adapt, ability to flex, ability to change, like ability to be resilient, like all those things are now proven, which is awesome. But there is underlying all of it, I think, an anxiety for people. And so I think as a leader right now, thinking about how you keep people now over an extended period, A, productive, but B, I would just say manage what is a very understandable level of anxiety. And it's showing up in multiple ways. Like I said, I mean, we have our own issues in the US with racism and all these other things going on, but there's no doubt that the undercurrent of COVID and then this sort of social inequality and injustice, these things are all kind of, I would just say, conflating and coming together, converging in a way that are going to make people feel very uneasy for a long period of time. And I think as leaders, we have to think about how to manage an extended period of time where people are naturally uneasy, and finding, a way, even in your professional work, to make people feel stable and cared for, while continuing to be adaptable. I think that's going to be the extended leadership challenge, actually, because I don't see this anxiety going away anytime soon.
Kevin, is that what you're seeing, or any quick lessons learned you want to share?
Sure. There's been a couple of aha things. One I'll share, Mark, that's maybe a little bit more personal, and it builds off something Sukhinder was just saying, which is, I think in some ways it's easy to be a leader in times like these because you just have to show up and be authentic and be present, and and that seems to really resonate. On the other hand, really what we're spending a lot of time thinking about is trying to make sure that we start kind of every interaction with an internal interaction with a recognition that times aren't normal for our people, and we've got people that are more or less stressed given what's going on. We've got people that are more or less challenged at home, given, depending the ages of their kids, or, whether they're caring for, other people in their family, whatever the case may be. And one of the things I found personally tricky is I'm very lucky, right? I've got an office at home with a door that can close. My kids are old enough that they don't drive me crazy. And life's been fine. I've just been able to shift to on home, and it's been okay. That's not true of everybody on my team. And as a leader, I'm finding that right balance of recognizing that it's different, and accepting that it's different, and giving people permission to work differently, and even being accepting of what in normal times you might say are people not delivering. But where do you draw that line? I don't have an answer to that. It's something that is an ongoing element that is top of mind every time that we're talking about what we're trying to get done and what else we can add to the workload, and whether we can actually deliver it or not. Having said that, the comments about culture have very much been true. I mean, we come to work every day. I would say probably 85% of the people that work in the company are at the company because of what we do. They also happen to like their job, but they really, really are passionate about the idea of trying to make the world a healthier place. And that's helped a lot. We've had a few different aha moments. I mentioned one, which was that we were well down a measured path of going to more of a virtual experience. That we piloted some stuff last year, and then we were doing some additional pilots the first part of this year, and maybe sometime towards the end of this year we'd get to the next step. And now all of a sudden here we are with virtual workshops, and yet the NPS scores on those are outstanding. And now, and our members are telling us they love it, and they want to maintain a balance of physical and virtual. And so we are way ahead of where we otherwise would have been. And it's been kind of the culture and the creativity of the team that's allowed us to do that, and the necessity of the situation that has forced us to do that. Similarly, some of the stuff that we built into the app, I would put in that same bucket. And I guess the last one that I think is something that you maybe take for granted, but I don't think we should, is a global team Our CEO is one of her favorite sayings right now is "Never waste a good crisis," and you can leverage that instability to actually get everybody really, really focused. And I'm not saying that we want to constantly create crisis, because I don't think that's healthy either. But it is remarkable what a global team can deliver when they're aligned, focused, and empowered. And operating in the way we are right now, I would emphasize that empowerment part. Just setting out the goals of what we're trying to do and then getting out of the way and letting people do it. Man, that's come through in spades. And that's something that I hope as a culture that we maintain as we kind of grow our way out of this as well.
Francis, let's come back to you. I think we talked in the prep about a bit of, it's a bit of a patchwork in terms of programs now. And is that something the government is sort of actively thinking about as a lesson learned, and what happens from here?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're hearing now is, and you're looking for signs all across the economy, right? What's going on, the various reopenings that are going on, in different ways in different provinces and territories. If I take, my example, I live in Ottawa. So if I were to live across the bridge and 5 minutes from here, I could go to a hairstylist now. But in Ontario, looks like they may be out till the end of the summer. So, it's really tricky when you're a federal government, you're trying to, make sure that you're keeping pace and keeping your supports in line with what people's opportunities are going to be. I just want to pick up as well on the issue of, how these things
So we've still got a bit of a tech issue there. Tony, could you just sort of round us out on this topic? I know you've thought a bit about supply chains, and you've got some comments there too.
Well, we're talking about kind of organizational differences and the role of culture and so on, and we're a business school, but we're also an organization, and we're seeing some of those same issues as well, about people pulling together. One thing I think is interesting, and I see in our chat, we've got somebody who has made this point, and Dave calls it, we've noticed a web conference days where the novelty of Zoom conferencing is wearing off on staff and clients. And I feel like, in a crisis, everybody pulls together, right? And so there was lots of talk about nerve centers, command centers, SWAT teams, control tower, whatever your metaphor was. And I had a CEO on in my class not too long ago, and said, it's been amazing how productive and engaged and energetic people are. Like, we meet every morning, we say, what are you doing today? And go around the table, and then we come back the next day and say, well, did you do what you said you were going to do? And so, like, productivity has been incredible, And I guess one thing that I wonder about, and I think this is to the heart of Dave's point, is how sustainable is all of that going to be? Can we kind of really keep that energy level up? And I think, maybe not. And so I had another CFO this time from a big company who has realized this as well. And I think we're seeing companies now doing things like, okay, Wednesday afternoon, no Zoom, right? And sort of, mandated downtimes. And she even said, we are insisting people take vacation. You can't not take your vacation, things like that. So I think it's an interesting question of, this is exhausting, actually. Being on Zoom and being on and all that kind of stuff is quite tiring. I can tell you as a teacher, I'm slammed after teaching for 3 hours in this format, and unlike in physical. So we have to kind of pace ourselves. And I think companies are kind of starting to realize that we can't operate in SWAT team mode the whole time.
So I mentioned in my opening comments about how I think I've seen this backslide. HBR just put out a really good piece on the regression phase of a crisis, and how it's sort of normal to see people run out of adrenaline, run out of steam, and slip back a little bit. Yesterday I was on a call with an alum, Alex McRae, who ex McKinsey, and is with this sort of culture shop, and they've got a whole tool set newly built around this idea of, what happens now that it's harder, now that people sort of run out of gas. But we're also trading stories. I said, oh, cool, you're working harder than ever, right? Yeah, we're working harder than ever. Any revenue? No. Any revenue? No. So it's, there's this funny balance between pushing people to work really hard and the pivot, but where is that business model sort of going to come back in? So maybe that's a good bridge to, we want to spend a fair amount of time thinking about where do we go from here? Where do things go from here? And none of us are prognosticators, but I think we all probably have views. Sukhinder, could we come back to you? What's sort of a view from here?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, first of all, I think there's a gigantic test coming of like, as you open up and mix metaphors, are the numbers really any better for people who stayed tight versus people who opened up, right? So I think that there's, first of all, I think a second level of kind of research, if you will. I mean, my husband and I, we watch the coronavirus stats every day in states that were less or more well, there's hard to find more restrictive, but less restrictive than California. And you know what? The data is really unclear. I mean, so I think that I think we're in this period of, as we talk about figuring out what does the mixed metaphor mean? What it ultimately might mean, it's just a flattening of the curve for a long while. That's my suspicion. And it's going to be hard to tell while individuals, do get better at, and companies get better at contact tracing, because that's all going to have temperature taking, contact tracing, that will happen. But I think it just may be a long period of plateau. That's my suspicion, but I don't know that for sure, right? Until a virus. I think what most people are already doing is, whether you're a company that's basically stopped giving guidance for 2020, or whether you're managing a private business that's trying to sustain your employees when revenues are very small or zero because you're still closed. What I sense is happening is people are just going to try and sustain through 2020, and everybody is turning to 2021 and already setting their ambitions. And really, your question is, how do you keep, if you're in a zero or low revenue environment, how do you keep the staff you have productive and able to focus on something on which they can make progress, the idea of small wins? I think we'll see an extended period where the data tells us it's sort of all munged together, if you will, those who are restrictive and those who are less, in a sustained, maybe long plateau where until a vaccine happens, there's just a steady number of cases, but hospitals can handle them with contact tracing and fevers in place. And that will be your new normal for a little bit. And then I think that ultimately in 2021, we will get back to, and maybe it's post-vaccine, maybe it's that we have herd immunity. I think you'll see that 2021 is sort of where people start to put their energies on. And this year is about sustenance, personal sustenance. And this year is about professional sustenance, meaning keeping your teams, cared for and productive, and able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's my gut. I mean,
I think the timing is fascinating, right? On what everybody's sort of mental image of the cut line is. We've all, it's come up on this call a number of times. How long can we, or how long will we X? Keep people going, live without revenue, psychologically, and I personally, I think September is an important cut line when schools either reopen or don't, on rotations or not, and parents have a thing to deal with. But I guess that's also part of the point of it is
September's another. I think September's one and Q1's another one. I think there's a cut line in September where people want some version of the next phase of this, whether that's the mixed metaphor, right? I mean, offices, you can come in or not come in. Parents, I mean, our schools have just said a week on, a week off is likely what they're going to do, but and you have the next metaphor in your head. And then there'll be the metaphor after that, which hopefully is, back to, a more open society.
Kevin, how about you? You may be past your first real cut line already, but is there another one that is either written down or you're thinking about?
Yeah, so a couple of different things. One is on the topic of Zoom fatigue. There's been some good research into that already. One of the little tips I'll just share with everybody. One of the things that's really distracting is if you see yourself on there, because you spend a lot of time looking at yourself, and that wears you out. So in Zoom, there is an ability to click your little 3 dots over yourself and turn off self-view. Your Zoom fatigue will go down dramatically if you do that. I've done that today, and I'm delighted that I'm not looking at myself as I'm doing this webinar. Secondly, it's interesting. We've got this massive social experiment going on right now that Sukhinder talked about, right? Where I don't need to predict the future because the future is already happening in various different jurisdictions around the world. Sweden never did shut down the same way. Tony talked about, are we all Sweden now? Some of the, we track data constantly on a weekly basis in the markets where we operate around people's attitudes and willingness to do different things. And it is amazing how different it is, even in the markets we're in. So the markets that we're looking at, US, UK, Canada, Germany, France, Australia, New Zealand, Belgium, Netherlands, Switzerland, and Sweden. So it's a pretty good cross-section of European, North American, Australia, New Zealand. We don't have Asia, we don't have Africa, but there's some other things that we do have. And it is amazing to see, like, for example, shaking hands. It's very, very different by market. A willingness to attend something that has 10 or more people, very, very different by market. Like Germany is at 58% of people saying they would attend an event with 10 or more people. Canada's at 34. It's like half the level. And within Canada, to the point made earlier, I guarantee Manitoba and New Brunswick look very different than Ontario and Quebec. Right? So that's the complexity that we're dealing with. So a couple that are pretty sobering. Canada, willingness to go to a retail store, 36%, and that hasn't moved in the last 4 weeks. There's been no increase in willingness to do that. So we're talking about opening up, and I'm sure it would look different in Manitoba, but in aggregate, that metric hasn't moved in Canada. To contrast that, France, which was way harder than hit than us, that's at 70%. So you would expect a much stronger, Switzerland, 83%. Sweden, interestingly, only 55%. It's actually come down the last couple of weeks. So, it's interesting to see how this plays out. You do see more of a willingness in the US than in Canada, but only marginally more, kind of 3 or 4 points higher. So as I think about, the way we're looking at things right now, Mark, I've kind of got 3 time horizons. In hindsight, the time horizon we've just come through was the easy one. It didn't feel easy at the time.
Yeah.
But to the point made earlier, move everybody home, move to virtual, investor member value, that like, fine, good, that's clear. We're now planning for the complexity of reopening while also not being sure what's going to happen in the near term, and trying to keep an eye on what we think the reality of the third time frame, a post-reopen, looks like, so that we're not screwing ourselves up for 18 months from now by decisions we're making today. What's clear is what we thought we were going to be doing 12 weeks ago is not what we're doing. That's changed a lot. We tend to spend a lot of time really trying to look at it from the customer's lens. And the challenge in the here and now is actually managing member expectations. We're trying to do what's right, safe, consistent with the guidelines of the various jurisdictions. But you're seeing customers having an appetite to actually, in many cases, move more quickly. I'm fortunate right now, I'm not feeling pressured to be a first mover, but if customers really start clamoring for it, I've got to take that seriously. We have to think about how we manage that. Things like a second wave will obviously, change the reality a lot. Right now, we're trying to plan for the worst and hope for the best kind of thing. And so, our plans by and large don't account for a second wave, although from a structure point of view in the company and where I've tried to take cost out, I certainly have, prepared ourselves in a way that if it was to happen, we'd be okay. But really the goal is to open judiciously, take advantage of where we can maybe push the envelope a little bit more, like, the East Coast or the prairies, learn from that and then fast cycle. I think an agile operating model is going to be true, not just in people's product development cycles, but throughout the organization over the next little while.
I was thinking a few minutes ago, I'm moving to Manitoba, but I'm not. I'm moving to France. That's where I belong. Tony, what's your view? What's your view of all this? Where do we go from here?
Well, if I just bump it back to the kind of macro context a little bit here as we wind down, I can't tell whether the storm has passed and the sun's out because that we've come out of lockdown and we're all kind of rubbing our eyes and going, or we're in the eye of the hurricane where it's also sunny. And what I guess, we talked about way back in April, we talked about this idea of a W-shaped recovery of the possibility that we would unlock, we'd all come out and play, and then we'd get sick and we'd have to clamp back down again. And I don't think we have run enough of a time experiment in any place that, at least that I know, even China really, which came out first because they went in first, to know whether that's going to happen, especially when we start to get children back to school, if we start to allow borders to open and things like that. Are we going to get hit with another shock? What I will say this is stock markets have clearly priced in storm has passed. So what happens? So, Marco, you always tease me about being Eeyore or Canada's, Dr. Doom. But, what happens if, in fact, we do get a round tripper on the on the virus, which of course everybody knows now that that's what happened in the 1918-20 Spanish flu. And, we have to lock back down again and so on. So I guess I do worry about that. And so I think everybody's watching very carefully what's going to happen to us, all of us, especially those little Swedens now running experiments, whether it's Georgia or Germany or British Columbia and so on. Are we going to see upticks, clamp back down and not? Or to Sukhinder's point, I think, maybe a little bit more positive view, which is that the curve really does seem to be flattening and trending down. And maybe that's just a secular view. So I don't have an answer to that, but I'm sure, I think we're all watching very closely with where we're at, storm lifted or eye of hurricane.
I will say sorry, just last point. I think just come back to China. For those of us who have employees in China, I mean, StubHub has a large R&D center in China. I will tell you, it's one of the most hopeful things you can do is talk to your China team, because they are on the other side. I mean, they come to the office, they're like, and while they have social distancing, they now can sit in the same conference rooms, and literally there is envy across the video conferences. Teams talk about what it's like on the other side. So I would say that I think China and South Korea are both good models that it is possible, to start to open back up, if provided you have the infrastructure on contact tracing and simple things like, temperature checks.
I think you're seeing a little bit of that play in Ontario, where the numbers, if we're honest, are not really coming down. In fact, they've sort of done this a little bit lately. You've got an extension in the emergency order. And I think that's a sort of response to, gee, we really don't want to stop the reopening plan and not give people hope, but we can't also not respond to the data. And I think it's a compromise solution that you're seeing, which you can sort of empathize with, right? As much as it drives people like me crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting, Mark. It's almost like premiers are people too, and they react to peer pressure and keeping up with the Joneses.
Well, of course they do.
Like, I don't think McRae, left to its own devices, would be where we are right now. But there's so much of a groundswell of pressure to be moving forward that we're moving forward, even if we may not be ready to.
100% agree. And how can you fault them? I mean, they're people, but they also represent the people, right? So they have to balance out what, the views of constituents. We've got a handful of minutes left. I thought we'd try to get to some of the audience questions. Sukhinder, there was one that came in for you. So a million years ago, I worked in the live tennis business, and we were approached by this VR company that said, we can put headsets on people all over the world and you can sell more front row seats than you've physically got inventory for. And we never went there. Is the future of live entertainment somewhat tied up in VR?
Well, I think VR, AR, ways to be immersive in those experiences. Yes. I think we will see innovation there. I've also obviously been pitched on a lot of innovative technologies just to allow people to get back into stadiums and so on. So do I think VR has a role to play? Yes. Let's all agree that one thing that has happened out of COVID is people have discovered, first of all, anything streaming is on steroids right now. And I think that there will be a portion of customers where if you give them more immersive experiences, are more comfortable taking advantage of it by virtue of all the things we've learned about ourselves in our clustered time at home, right? So I do think VR has a role to play for those people who choose not to attend live. And I think you will see, a whole set of immersive experiences that maybe move to the forefront, right? Just because we've now trained ourselves to do a lot more things at home. I mean, witness everything that's happening with immersion in fitness right now. Peloton on, tonal, mirror, anything that gives you an immersive experience at home is seeing a surge.
Tony, there's a question that came for you. I think it's interesting. So the question that came in was, you used to be, or you are pretty good at smelling out folks in class who haven't done their reading. Is it the same over Zoom? Which, feel free to broaden that question if you like. Good
cheers to that question. Well, I'm trying my best. I'll tell you what, I'm trying my best, and I've gotten pretty good. What I'm better at catching now on Zoom is yawns. I call out yawns a lot and that kind of thing. But Yeah, but the real question is, has it changed? And this in some ways, I was thinking, could we do, AR, VR for our educational environment? Because we are all, as you know, Mark, very worried about that talk about the no fun economy, the no fun education, right? It's all now going to be asynchronous, read your textbook, we post up some slides, and oh my gosh. So we're working very hard at Ivey, I think, to really try to build the fun in, build the community, and build the cohort in for now virtually, that we can, and build some of the great interactivity that is our hallmark, right? We have to do that. So we have to
100%.
at actually doing things like cold calling on Zoom, which is sort of weird, but you get used to it and so on. So because we're just going to have to realize that we're not coming back to full normal model in your cut point in September. We're just not. So we'll have to adapt.
And Kevin, question came in for you, which is around customer experience. You and I've talked about customer experience for 20 years in a high level of detail. How do you think about that in sort of the new world? Are you using the same tools? Are you using different tools? Do you approach it differently?
So just before I go there, if you figure out how to virtualize the seats, then that'll be a good thing, Tony, because my middle guy is actually coming to Western this fall, and he kind of thinks that the wraparound experience is going to kind of suck, and he's probably not wrong. So hopefully we get back to a post-vaccine world and people can go back to having the lives that they expect to have. But on your question, really at the core of it, Mark, has always been really understanding technology is an enabler. It doesn't actually deliver anything if you don't actually have the right insights into the whys behind what customers are doing. And so, really digging into the whys hasn't changed. We might be using different tools than we otherwise might have done. Like, for example, we've got some work going on right now where we probably would have brought some people together to kind of really do some rapid prototyping and things like that. And now obviously we can't bring them together the same way. So we'll do it virtually. But what is really, really interesting is trying to get the finger on the pulse of what is perhaps different given the current situation and whether that will sustain itself or not. Sukhinder talked about the bulge of no pun intended of kind of wellness apps, whether it be Peloton or whatever the case might be. We've benefited from that as well. Do we think we've seen a systemic shift in people's attitudes about wellness? I hope so. Certainly being healthy would have helped more people survive this pandemic than being unhealthy, which is unfortunately the situation a lot of the world is in. Do I really think that people have fundamentally changed? I don't know. I don't know if this has gone on long enough. World War II changed attitudes and perceptions, but it went on for years, right? Whether this has actually gone on long enough to really rewire people or not, I don't know. Certainly some, whether that will be a broad thing, we'll continue to try to keep our finger on it.
We're up against it on time as always. It's too bad we lost Frances, but I just wanted to make, I'm not going to speak for her, but it just reflect one story that, she had for us in the prep, which was around the idea of the difficulty of fairness. If you're a government thinking about a patchwork of society, a patchwork of the economy, and a patchwork of provincial and municipal jurisdictions where rules are different, and how to treat people fairly when you've got hairdressers allowed to go back to work in one place and not allowed to in another. And so I don't think there was an answer there, but she wanted to make sure that everybody knew that was like very conscious and very much on the minds of government policymakers as they think about the next wave of reaction, which is, sort of how to deal with that. Sean, let's just come to you to kind of wrap up. What happens from here with this piece?
Sure. So as you mentioned, we do have some extra questions in the chat. We'll collect some of those and add them to our follow-up article, which will be live at iveyacademy.com later this afternoon. We'll send out a link to that, which will also have a recording to the full broadcast if you want to share it with your colleagues or watch it later.
Okay, great job, Sukhinder and Tony and Kevin. Thanks so much for all the time you invested a lot to get ready. You invested a lot again today. Really appreciate your insights too. To everyone who tuned in, thanks so much, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Take care.
Thank you, Mark.